I think there's a really good chance that Howie Roseman yet again found a day 3 draft gem from the 2025 NFL Draft. I'll tell you why coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Friday edition of the show. I'm your host, as always, Louis DiBiase. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters for $20 off your first purchase. Do apologize about not having an episode yesterday. We're having some legitimate issues with StreamYard over the last few days, so was not able to record a show. But I did promise you 5 episodes a week. I'm still going to give you 5 episodes. So we got today's show and then a bonus Saturday morning show as well for you on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. You know, the other day I was thinking about Jahad Campbell and how I think he could be the favorite to win Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2025 if he stays healthy and he meets the ceiling that the Eagles are envisioning for him. And that started to get me thinking about the overall ceiling of this rookie class, about Drew Makuba. Is he going to end up starting at safety over Sidney Brown? Like, who could be that next day 3 or undrafted player that miraculously has a much bigger role than we ever imagined in their first season? Like, you know, Corey Clement did in 2017 and Reed Blankenship did in 2022. And when I started to think about that, I started to think about a prospect that I haven't really been focusing on a whole lot. After the draft, a lot of my coverage afterwards, and even discussing like some of these young role players that are in year 1, year 2, or year 3. It's a guy from Virginia Tech, the Eagles' last draft pick, Antwaun Powell-Ryland. When you add on Powell-Ryland's ceiling on top of the other 7 prospects that Howie Roseman took in rounds 4 through 7, I think there's a really good chance that one of these guys ends up being maybe not Jordan Mailata, like the next best player at his position, but maybe it's another Avonte Maddox or a Reed Blankenship, or you do get just one really solid out of nowhere year from a Corey Clement or a Josh Adams, or, you know, just you go down the list, like Josh Sweat was a day 3 pick, and look what a solid starter he was for 7 years in Philadelphia. I think there's a really good chance that one of these guys becomes that player, just based on law of averages. I mean, they had 8 draft picks. Do you think with Howie Roseman's track record on day 3 throughout his career that all of them are going to be busts? Like, I highly doubt that. So based on law of averages, I think one of these guys will pan out. But it's also like who they took. I mean, you guys have heard me talk about Ty Robinson's going to have a really interesting role from the get-go. Like, as a rookie, he's going to have the biggest role of any of these day 3 prospects. I think he's going to be a really, you know, solid rotational pass rusher on the inside. I think Cameron Williams could be one of the steals of the draft. If he ended up going back to college, if he played for the Longhorns again this year, he might have been a first, second, or maybe early 3rd round pick in the 2026 NFL draft. Miles Hinton has some incredible size and legit experience at the University of Michigan that could translate well into Stoutland University. Mac McWilliams, I really like his inside-outside versatility at cornerback. I think he can be your replacement to Avonte Maddox. So there's a lot of these guys that I love their traits. Smile Mondon. I'm going to get that name right eventually. Smile Mondon's athleticism, his speed. He's a low-floor player, but he's a high-ceiling player as well at the inside linebacker spot. So all these guys are very enticing, but the one that I really haven't mentioned much is Antwaun Powell-Ryland, the Eagles' final draft pick. And the other day I was talking about how Joshua Uche could have a much bigger role this year than we're talking about. But if he doesn't, like, let's say Uche just does not pan out, right? And, you know, he ends up being the healthy scratch kind of player that he was last year for Kansas City, or the guy that fell out of favor with the New England Patriots and kind of lost his starting job over the final, like, year and a half that he was in New England in 2023 and then 2024. Let's say Azeez Ojulari is kind of up and down and just gets hurt as he normally does, and they need help. I think Howie Roseman likely will go seek out external options in free agency or the trade market, but Powell-Ryland has an interesting opportunity, and he is so productive. I mean, that's the thing, is college production, I think the Eagles cared about it a little bit too much in the past, but I mean, how can you deny the combination not only of college production, but also he's an elite relative athletic score prospect. He scored pretty much in every category that matters in the RAS category. He was testing like an elite prospect when it comes to vertical, when it comes to speed, lateral agility. Like Powell-Ryland, he's undersized. He's not going to be an every down player. He does struggle against the run, like anchoring, setting the edge is definitely an issue. But if Joshua Uche doesn't pan out, or Azeez Ojulari as those like third or fourth guys, those niche, specialists in pass rushing situations, Powell-Ryland could be that guy. He had 16 sacks last year with Virginia Tech. And again, it's not just college production like Derek Barnett, and he's not really that talented of a player. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside was that guy back in 2019. Like, he's not that kind of prospect. Like, this is a legitimate athlete that has a really good pass rushing bag. I mean, he has some of the quickest hands that I've seen for a pass rusher coming out of the draft. And his bend, his first step explosiveness is really good. So he is not a complete prospect by any means necessary. I mean, of course, that's why he was the Eagles' final pick. That's why he slipped to the 7th round. But I do think, as we've talked about, the ceiling or the floor of this edge group being a lot lower than it's been in years past. And the fact that the Eagles consistently find, the track record is they consistently find day 3 gems. It feels like at least every other draft, there's a lot of guys that could be that player. Miles Hinton, Cameron Williams, Smile Mondon, Ty Robinson. But I don't feel like I've given enough attention to Antwaun Powell-Ryland. He's a really interesting player to keep a close eye on in training camp. I really do think it's wide open on the edge. Like, as Vic Fangio said the other day, it's not going to be Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt. Like, those are your top 2 guys. That's hopefully the face of your future at the edge rushing position. But Azeez Ojulari is on a 1-year deal with little to no guarantees, and same for Joshua Uche. Powell-Ryland's a 7th round pick, but the Eagles have given legitimate opportunities to those kind of prospects year after year, and it's there for the taking. Like, I could see him totally eating up the preseason, and maybe at some point in the year, like Jalix Hunt at the end of last year, he gets in the rotation. They have to use him right, though. Again, this is a player that you have to use like they didn't use Bryce Huff last season, like you probably have to use Joshua Uche in 2025. He is not an every down player. He's very undersized for a pass rusher on the edge. He can't really rush inside. He isn't the longest player from a wingspan perspective, but he has some elite traits, a couple like really elite traits. And that's what I like getting from a prospect on day 3 is a couple things that they do really, really well. Because at least, worst case scenario, if they can maximize those strengths, even if they don't develop the weaknesses, if they don't fix the weaknesses, they can still be solid role players. He has elite speed, elite bend, elite hands, elite pass rushing production for a player coming out of the 7th round. And he's somebody that's really interesting. I would definitely keep an eye out for Antwaun Powell-Ryland. We're going to start calling him APR if he becomes a legit player for the Eagles defense. So overall, again, this edge group is risky, but the floor is definitely lower than years past, but I'm really intrigued by all 5 of these main guys. Like Nolan Smith, of course, can he be the star of the show in year 3 after a year 2 breakout? Jalix Hunt, fascinated by Jalix in year 2. Can he take that Nolan Smith type of step in year 2? Sounds like he's been having a great summer and spring practice so far this year. Azeez Ojulari, Joshua Uche, very interested in what they're getting out of those players. Antwaun Powell-Ryland, another guy in that room that it's like, all right, let's see what you've got. Let's see what you've got. And again, it's a risky play, but I don't blame Howie Roseman for taking this approach. Like, you have to see through the investment of Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt. You got to, after the promise they've shown over the last year, you have to let those guys get the chance to be the guys, because that's what you drafted, at least Nolan, to be. And Jalix Hunt wasn't a low pick. Like, this was a 3rd round prospect with a legitimate elite ceiling. And with Ojulari and Uche, I think those guys can replace Josh Sweat's production by at least, 70%. And it's at such a cheaper rate. Like Josh Sweat, as much as I love Josh Sweat, he wasn't worth that contract. So I don't blame Howie for taking this approach. The only thing that, if this doesn't work, I might say could come back to bite him is the decision to pay Bryce Huff instead of Hassan Reddick, because that's the one move that right now Howie was banking on having a 3rd option in that top tier of this position. Like, he was banking on it not just being Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt. I don't think he expected Hunt to be this important right away. I think he expected Bryce Huff to be that number 1 or number 2 guy along with Nolan Smith. I think he did anticipate Josh Sweat leaving in free agency. I don't think he anticipated Bryce Huff being that bad and needing Jalix Hunt to be a top 2 guy right away. But outside of that, I agree with the approach. I would not trade for Trey Hendrickson or TJ Watt. If this doesn't work with these young guys, this young room, then yeah, maybe go out there and sign a Matthew Judon or a Zadarius Smith type of veteran, or maybe then you trade for somebody. But for right now, it's risky, but I like this room. And I think APR is another one of those prospects in that group that's really intriguing to me. And I think you should really keep an eye out for him when training camp rolls around in just about 5.5 weeks. It'll be here before you know it. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, a fun question from one of our listeners that hit me up on X the other day. And we'll get into it on a fun Friday edition of the show. The 2024 Eagles are an all-time great team in NFL history. What team in franchise history, what other version of the Philadelphia Eagles would have the best chance to beat them? I'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, guys, today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Gametime. Look, there's nothing like the NBA playoffs. This has been one of the most enjoyable playoffs that I've watched in a very long time. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds in Indiana. The crowd's been insane. 2 great fan bases for the finals. Oklahoma City as well. It's the kind of atmosphere that you must experience live, and this year's matchups are already delivering. If you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games like the NBA Finals. Prices on the app, they actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. I remember, too, for the NFL, getting to the NFC Championship game, Eagles, 49ers, I got it through Gametime. That was one of the best live sporting events or live events in general. It was one of the best experiences of my entire life. And with Gametime, you also are going to get an exact view of your seat. So on top of the great prices, you know you're going to get a great view before you purchase your tickets, and you'll get great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. And they also have the Gametime guarantee. Your tickets are 100% authentic and will arrive on time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, guys, thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Interesting question from one of our listeners, and I thought I'd talk about it on the show. You know, over the offseason, Saquon Barkley's been talking about it. I've been talking about it on the show. How good were the 2024 Philadelphia Eagles? Not just in franchise history. I think it's clear they're the best team in franchise history, but how do they rank all time in the history of the NFL? Saquon says they're a top 5 team of all time. I totally agree with that. With that being said, one of our listeners asked us this week, who beats them? Like if you get one game, and the 2024 Philadelphia Eagles are like Thanos for our MCU diehard fans out there. Bear with me with this analogy. The 2024 Eagles are like Thanos, and you have to put together a team of Avengers, basically. You got to go across the multiverse and assemble 3 different heroes to take Thanos down. Who is taking down the 2024 Eagles in one game? Like one single game elimination. Who's doing it in Eagles history? What other version of the Eagles would have the best chance to beat the 2024 Birds? And I think the 2024 Eagles, again, best team in franchise history, top 5 team in the history of the NFL. You could argue they're the best team of all time. I wouldn't go that far, but I will say they are top 5. For me, there's 3 teams that I would assemble, and I don't think any of them would be favored in this matchup, but for different reasons, I would bring back 3 different teams from Philadelphia Eagles history. The first team, this one, and it can't be, so I made a rule for myself with this exercise. It cannot be a past team that has a lot of the same players that were on the 2024 roster. So 2022, although I think that's the second best team in franchise history, a lot of it's the same roster. So I feel like that's cheating a little bit. So I removed like the last, up until 2021 and on, I removed those teams because that's like the same core. So for me, the first team I'm getting is the other team that won the championship, the other team that won the Super Bowl, the 2017 Super Bowl 52 champion Philadelphia Eagles. For me, the reason that I went with the 2017 Eagles, not that they're even the most talented team in franchise history on paper outside of 2024. Like, I think there's a couple other teams that didn't win a title that you could say on paper, they're a more talented team that in one game might have a better chance to take down the 24 Birds. But why I put number one, 2017, is because against this 2024 Eagles team, you're going to have to be fearless and aggressive against this team for 4 quarters. Like, kind of like what it took to beat Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 52. You have to empty the tank. You have to play fearless. You got to try everything, including plays like the Philly special, to get it done. You got to go for it on 4th down. You got to take deep shots. You got to have a fearless quarterback. You have to have an elite offensive line and a defensive line to counter what the 2024 Eagles trenches had. So I think the 2017 Eagles have all of that. They were so fearless, so aggressive, led by Doug Peterson, Carson Wentz, then Nick Foles. I think in this scenario, I don't know who's the quarterback. It's probably Carson. If I had to choose one, it's prime Carson Wentz before the injury. But let's say it has to be the team that won the Super Bowl and it's Nick Foles. The Super Bowl 52 version of Nick Foles is one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen. PFF has it graded out as still the best performance a quarterback's ever had in the Super Bowl. It's the number 1 graded quarterback performance in Super Bowl history. So whether it's Wentz or Foles, that's the other thing this 2017 Eagles team had. Even though it was only for 1 year and it was 2 different players, they had historic elite quarterback play. So it's 3 keys to beating the 2024 Eagles that the 2017 team had. Fearless and aggressive, elite in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and they had historically good quarterback play from 2 different guys, Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. So for that reason, those reasons, I would say the 2017 Eagles are the number 1 team that I think could take down the 2024 Super Bowl 59 champions. The other team that, if I had to go into a time machine and take back one of those former Eagles to take down the 24 Birds, I would go back to 2004. I would go say, Donovan McNabb, Terrell Owens, you guys got to get along for just one more game. We have to save the universe from the 2024 Philadelphia Eagles, and you got to take them down. I think McNabb, T.O., that 2004 Eagles powerhouse that finally got the job done, finally made it to the Super Bowl after 3 straight years of losing in the NFC Championship. I think that team would have a good chance because they finally had the missing piece to what was already an elite roster, right? They had such a good defensive line, elite linebacker play, Jeremiah Trotter Sr. in the middle, the Axeman, the secondary, whether it was Troy Vincent and Bobby Taylor, or then this time around it was Lito Shepherd and, Sheldon Brown. They always had elite cornerbacks, an elite all-time great safety, an all-time leader in Brian Dawkins. That team had such a historically good defense. They had an elite franchise quarterback in Donovan McNabb, an all-time great play caller in Andy Reid, an amazing dual threat running back in Brian Westbrook, but they, those past teams didn't have the receivers. It was Todd Pinkston and James Thrash and Freddie Mitchell. Well, Terrell Owens comes in, and he's one of the greatest receivers of all time, and they make it to the Super Bowl. So I feel like that was one of the most complete teams in Eagles history. Outside of 2024 and 2022, you could make the argument that's actually the 3rd most complete team the Eagles have ever had on paper, right? I think even over 2017, I think 2004 is the 3rd most complete team in franchise history. So, yeah, McNabb would choke at times back then, and so would Andy Reid. Those guys couldn't get the job done a whole lot, but the 2004 Eagles did get the job done, and they had some all-time great talents on both sides of the ball at the most important positions. There were just very few flaws in that football team from an on-field perspective, so I took the 2004 Eagles as the 2nd team to attack the 2024 Birds. And then the 3rd team, this one was tough. I thought about 2010 because I just wanted firepower. I'm like, we might have to win. We might not be able to stop the 2024 Eagles, so we might just need talent on offense to be in a Super Bowl 52 like shootout or Super Bowl 57. So I thought about the 2010 Eagles with Michael Vick, Deshaun Jackson, LaShawn McCoy, Jeremy Maclin, Brent Selleck. You got Asante Samuel Jr. in the secondary of a bad defense, but you could get a forced turnover on Jalen Hurts. Trent Cole was an elite pass rusher on the defensive line. Outside of that, that defense had very little. But I did think about that 2010 Eagles. I decided to go with another team, though, instead. I went with the 1990 Randall Cunningham-led Philadelphia Eagles. Why? That offense wasn't as talented as the 2010 Eagles, but that was the best version of Randall Cunningham we've ever seen. He was the MVP runner-up that year, put together one of the best statistical seasons a quarterback's had at the time. In the 90s, this guy is rushing for over 900 yards, was carrying an offense that didn't have great weapons. Randall Cunningham was an MVP caliber of player that year, and he was a dual threat. Like, he could beat you with, that was the year he had that, 99-yard touchdown, ducking under Bruce Smith, getting it to Fred Barnett down the field. He had one of the strongest arms in the history of the league. He was ahead of his time from a mobility perspective. So Cunningham that year, that was peak Randall Cunningham, and that team had a defense the 2010 Eagles did not have. That had maybe the best defense in franchise history with Reggie White, Jerome Brown, Clyde Simmons, Seth Joyner and Eric Allen, Wes Hopkins, Andre Waters setting the tone at safety. Cunningham would have to carry the load compared to the 2010 Eagles offense. But I'd rather have Cunningham, an elite Cunningham, and that defense rather than just the Michael Vick, Deshaun Jackson, LaShawn McCoy-led offense. I don't think that 2010 defense would have been able to stop a nosebleed against the 2024 Birds, so I went with the 1990 Eagles. So those are the three teams. Great question, by the way. I got to find out the name, but shout out to one of our listeners, whoever asked me that question. That was a lot of fun. The three teams that had the best chance to beat the 2024 Eagles in franchise history: 2017, 2004, and 1990. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on X at LockedOnBirds, at DiBiase LOE. Great stuff. Again, if you hit me up on Twitter or on our YouTube community page, and this stuff helps me create content, and it's really fun to talk about some of the stuff that you guys come up with. So I really appreciated that, and that was a fun exercise for sure. We'll wrap up this edition of Locked On Eagles coming up next. That exercise got me thinking about the 2017 Eagles. If I could steal one player from that Super Bowl 52 roster for the 2025 Eagles, who would it be? We'll get into that as we wrap up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. All right, Eagles fans, wrapping up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Again, since we didn't do a show yesterday, I promised you 5 episodes this week. I'm going to be doing a bonus episode Saturday morning, so that'll drop for you on YouTube as soon as I'm done, and it'll also be on all podcast platforms as well. Really fun exercise talking about who could beat the 2024 Eagles in franchise history. What other 3 Eagles teams from the past, if I had to assemble a team of Avengers, if I had to get the big 3, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, who are those 3 Avengers that could potentially beat the 2024 Eagles? I said it was the 2017 Super Bowl champs, the 2004 McNabb-T.O. powerhouse, and then that 1990 Cunningham and historic defense in the Kelly Green. So those are the 3 teams. I thought about 2010. My rule, though, again, was that I could not use a team that had similar or the same, a lot of the same players. So 2022 would be the number 1 team, but it's a lot of the same guys as the 2024 core. So that felt kind of redundant or cheap to use them in this exercise. I feel like that wouldn't really make much sense. But I was thinking about the 2017 roster in general and thinking about how they stack up compared to the other Super Bowl champs of 2024. And, that roster, I do feel like, though, is, yes, it was a Cinderella story. You lost your quarterback, your franchise left tackle, a Hall of Fame running back that year, your best special teams player. You're an underdog every single game in the playoffs. People are starting to see that season as kind of a Cinderella story. But also, to give the 2017 team some credit, they were a powerhouse all year long. They were the 1 seed for a reason. The playoffs went through Philadelphia for a reason, and it wasn't just because of Carson Wentz. That roster was elite. Was it top 5 historic like the 2024 Eagles? No, but I think the last few rosters Howie's put together have been so historically good. It has kind of changed our perception on the 2017 team, our perspective on that. Unjustly so. That roster was really, really good on both sides of the football. They had some liabilities, like cornerback was not a huge strength, but overall, like that team had legit players at every position, including the ones that were most important, the lines, pass catchers, quarterbacks as well. So I think that team is almost getting a little underrated in NFL history now because of how good these latest Eagles teams have become. Of that roster, if I could steal one guy for the 2025 Eagles, who would it be? There were two guys I really thought about, one on offense and one on defense. Brandon Brooks on offense, and then Malcolm Jenkins on defense. I think Malcolm Jenkins would be the perfect Swiss Army knife to replace Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. If you had a secondary imagine what Vic Fangio could do with Malcolm Jenkins and Cooper DeJean and Jahad Campbell on that second and third level of the defense. Like, good luck diagnosing his defense pre-snap if you're an opposing quarterback. So Malcolm Jenkins, who can play in the slot, play, dime linebacker, play deep safety, I think he would be ideal. But I really do love Drew Makuba. I love Cooper DeJean's versatility. I don't think they would need him as much as Brandon Brooks. So if I had to steal one player from that 2017 Eagles team, I think it would be Brandon Brooks. Brooks is another guy, kind of like the 2017 Eagles, that's becoming underrated in franchise history because there's been so many legendary offensive linemen. But Brandon Brooks for, I'd say 3 straight years. 2016, that was actually 4 straight seasons. 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. Those 4 years he had in Philly before he got hurt or it wasn't 2020. He got hurt in 2021. But those first 4 years of the 6 in Philly, Brooks was the best right guard. Check that. Brandon Brooks was the best guard in football. And what's the Eagles' one potential weakness on the offensive side of the football? It's right guard with Tyler Steen. And I think Tyler Steen will be fine. But Brooks, I think, is an all-time great guard in the history of the NFL. One of the most underrated players in Eagles history. So it was originally Malcolm Jenkins it felt like the obvious answer. But thinking about it more, I would steal Brandon Brooks. Again, I think he's underrated because, we have Jason Kelce to talk about in franchise history, and Lane Johnson, and Jason Peters. I mean, there's so many incredible offensive linemen. Now Jordan Mailata. The list goes on and on. Brooks is underrated, but he was the best guard in football, I think, for 4 straight years. And if you put Brooks on this offense, it's maybe the most complete, talented offense in the history of football, right? And I don't think it's even close. So I would steal, of anybody of that roster, Brandon Brooks. Top 3, I'd say Brandon Brooks 1, Malcolm Jenkins 2, maybe Rodney McLeod 3. Just, again, I think they could use another safety. I think that's it. I mean, no, I take that back. Prime Fletcher Cox, right? I mean, to go next to Jalen Carter, or prime Brandon Graham. Prime BG or Fletch, I think, would be that third guy. But Brandon Brooks is actually number 1 for me. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. I'll be back tomorrow for a bonus Saturday edition of the show to make up for no podcast on Thursday. Still got 5 shows for you this week, and then we're back to our normal Monday through Friday programming next week. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.